So, I mean, food is one of the things you turn to first, and um, how to move the diet towards one that's sort of anti-inflammation. But what you don't do is advocate a sort of specific diet that people can follow, the kind of the one yeah, it's not the diet the diet for immunity, is it? So I mean, are there rules that apply widely to everybody before we go into more detail?
Yeah, I mean, I think really wanted to find in the scientific literature that one diet that I could deliver to people that would, be the ultimate plan for your immune system. But sadly, like the evidence doesn't shape up that way. And rather than focusing on what 4 or 5 so-called immune boosting superfoods, the evidence shows us again and again and again that it's the overall pattern of your diet, the foods you eat habitually over time, that matters the most. And in some ways that's quite nice, because it means that, if you for lunch today had some really ultra processed meal that probably wasn't serving you well, but if you look in the context of the whole week, then you know that you generally eat really well, lots of fresh fruit, diversity, plants, getting good protein sources, fats, minimally processed foods, and a calorie balance, so you're not over consuming or under consuming, then that one meal is kind of not so relevant in the greater context. And perhaps you enjoyed that one bad meal with a good friend, and you had lots of belly laughs, and it really nourished you emotionally. And so I think there's a lot to be said for not sort of living in a food prison. But going back to what to eat, it really is about making sure you don't have any vitamin deficiencies. So we know that all the essential vitamins and minerals are integral for immune function. So if you're deficient in any of them, not just the vitamin C and the zinc that you hear about a lot, or vitamin D, but any of them, and I've got resources in the book that show you the list of all the different, what we call essential vitamins and minerals. So these are the ones, if you don't have enough of, you will get a disease of deficiency, like scurvy or beriberi or rickets. We know that we have to have an abundance of these for the immune system to function well. But then on top of that, we've got these plant compounds, these so-called phytonutrients, and of which there are tens of thousands of these. So curcumin is a really good example of one that's been highly studied. The polyphenols you hear a lot about. And these are kind of the longevity compounds. So we don't have a recommended daily allowance for these, but we do know that they really, really are important to helping the function of our immune system. So they have antioxidant capabilities, and when our immune system is turning on inflammation, it causes oxidative stress. So we can quench that by eating a variety of different fruits and vegetables, fresh produce that contain these phytonutrients. But they also turn on certain genes that are important for regulating the immune response. So that regulatory arm I mentioned, that's sort of balancing out the boosting part, they're really important for that. They're really important for things like feeding the microbiome, so the collection of microbes that live all over our body, but there's a huge community of them in our gut. And these microbes are kind of the key educators and trainers of our immune system. So there's about 70% of our immune system along the digestive tract. And when we eat these plant foods, the microbes are actually the main ones who are breaking that fiber down inside those plant foods, because we don't really have the digestive capabilities to do that. So anybody who gets a bit of a sensitive tummy when they eat a lot of plants, it might be that your microbes are just struggling a bit to digest that, and you might need to sort of work on that microbiome a little bit before you can manage to tolerate large amounts of plants. But each of those phytonutrients in the plants are nurturing the microbiome. The fiber in the plants are fertilizing the microbiome. They break that down for us. They produce these bioactive metabolites that are absorbed into our blood and travel around our body. And there's studies showing that this can affect things like the immune system in the lungs and how well we respond to viruses. And there's actually been quite a lot of work come out with COVID looking at the microbes in our gut, looking at interventions like probiotics and seeing how that can be used as a tool to manipulate the immune system to improve our response to viruses. So it's really that unprocessed base of your diet should be plant foods, which doesn't mean you have to be plant-based. And I'm really nutritionally agnostic. Like, I'm not here to tell people that they have to follow a particular diet, but I do think each different fiber in the different plant foods are going to be working on nurturing a different type of microbe in your gut, and then you're going to get the benefit of all those bioactive compounds those microbes are producing. It's like your own personalized pharmacy coming from your gut. So if you have a fiber poor diet, those microbes are going to dwindle and diminish. They're not going to be very happy. So you're not going to be getting the benefits of this. And I think that one of the shifts that we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years is that we now eat a much higher percentage of ultra processed foods. And I've broken down in the book what these are, because I realize that term is a bit vague and could mean different things to different people. But ultra processed foods tend to be those things that we would consider the sort of bad, naughty treat foods, but they're now taking up a larger percentage of our diet, which means that there's a smaller percentage of our diet it being inclusive of these really healthful, minimally processed foods. And so the first kind of rule of thumb is just to reduce the ultra processed foods, make space for all the things that are really going to nourish our bodies.
So you say you're not, prescriptive about a single type of diet, and if people wanted to have the best possible diet for immunity, would it be a plant-based diet, or?
I would say it would be eating 30 different plants a week, and I don't just mean fruits and vegetables, but beans and pulses, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, legumes, as well as fruits and vegetables, and that's making up the bulk of your plate. I've got a little diagram somewhere in the book, maybe I can find it, of how the plate should look. There's a lot of evidence on consuming oily fish. It's a lean protein source, and protein is the building block of all our immune cells and antibodies. So we need to have those raw materials in our diet. We need to have enough protein in our diet. The little plate, and it also contains those healthy omega-3 fats, which are actually the raw materials for turning off inflammation. So I don't think you need to avoid meat. There's also studies looking at things like fermented dairy, so the kefir, and this can be a slightly more digestible form of dairy for people who find that they're slightly intolerant. Again, you don't need to include dairy in your diet, but there may be some forms of dairy that are seen to be beneficial when it comes to the immune system. And I think it's, including things like meat is great because they can be a really good source of certain vitamins and minerals, but also plant-based protein options are bringing all that fiber as well. So it's about maybe diversifying up your protein sources a little bit. And then there's sort of broadening the lens to look at things like your blood sugar response. So I've got a whole section on tips for how to normalize that blood sugar response after eating. And also your relationship to food, because I think a lot of the time, like, we kind of know what we should be eating, but why don't we do it? It's, the food environment makes it really hard. We've got advertising everywhere telling us, things that we should be eating that are not exactly healthful. And I always say that, food companies are not public health companies. They're just in the business of selling you food. They're not in the business of helping you look after your health. Food preparation takes time and effort and a certain level of skill. And if you don't know how to cook from scratch and you get home from a long day of work, it's highly unlikely that you're going to start chopping vegetables when you're tired and hungry. It's much easier to reach for those convenience foods. And again, that's fine, but when that starts to become a large portion of your diet, you're maybe missing out on some of the benefits of like cooking from scratch, minimally processed foods. And then there's, a lot. I just think it's hard. It's really hard to eat well. You kind of have to create your own mini food environment at home.
But you also say that one of the things that the least recognized or known about thing is just how important muscle is when it comes to your immune system. And you said it's non-negotiable. I'd go so far as to say it's perhaps the least recognized way in which we can care for our immune system.
Yes, 100%. I mean, I often think people ask me about diet. It's one of the first chapters about on the tips and tricks in the book. But if I was to tell anyone here the take home that they should leave with, it's to look after their muscle mass as they age. You know, we hear a lot about fat and obesity, and that's definitely not good for our health. Both fat and muscle are immunologically active organs, and that means they both contain populations of immune cells, but they also produce certain compounds that are influencing the immune balance. So if we have too much body fat, it can skew us towards inflammation and skew the immune response in a sort of unhealthy direction. And muscle mass seems to be more anti-inflammatory. So it's taking away that unwanted inflammation. Not only that, muscle mass is really important to mitigate immune aging. So many people will have heard with COVID that age was always listed as one of those key risk factors for severe COVID. But the interesting thing is that our immune system doesn't age the same as our chronological age, and we have studies showing that really active 70, 80-year-olds who've work their muscles regularly, take care of their muscle mass, can have immune systems that are decades younger than their actual age. And likewise, sedentary 20 or 30 somethings who are not using those muscles, and if you don't use them, you lose them, because muscle is quite a costly tissue for your body to maintain. They actually had an accelerated immune aging. So if you want to really rejuvenate your immune system and keep it young, which ultimately is going to be really important in those later decades of your life, where your risk of infection goes up, your risk of inflammatory disease goes up, and all sorts of other associated complications is raised, you can actually look after that muscle mass and help lower your immunological age. And we do that just by using our muscles. And in the UK, we have the Public Health England guidelines that are often that tell us we should do so many minutes of cardiovascular fitness per week, per day. But often second fiddle to that is the 2 strength-based exercise sessions we should be doing, and this is also in the World Health Organization guidelines as well, but we just don't hear about it. We don't hear about people saying that, yeah, you've got to get your steps in, you've got to, get your heart rate up, but you've also got to work your muscles at least twice a week. It doesn't have to be lifting weights. It can be things like Pilates, some forms of yoga. It can be lifting your shopping home. It can be gardening, or having a bit of a clear out at home, anything where you're lifting, putting resistance on your muscles, reminding your body that you need that muscle. So you're giving it a signal to hang on to that muscle. It's not necessarily going to help you grow muscles unless you are really lifting some heavy weights. And also protein in the diet is providing the raw materials. And if there's enough protein in your diet, it's going to help your body hang on to that muscle as well. And that becomes more important as we age. So sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, starts in our 30s, but it starts to accelerate every decade thereafter.
So, I mean, there's so much advice in the book that people will be able to read. So we'll just get through, we'll just kind of touch on some other areas before I go to audience questions. You call one of your sections the immune brain romance, and I know that especially in the How To Academy, lots of the talks that we've done, there is no doubt that people are becoming much more aware of the connection between mind and body. But in terms of immunology, I mean, how much can we help ourselves with our sort of mental well-being and just generally? I mean, you've stressed a lot here that actually the physical is something to aspire to, but stressing ourselves out too much about it is not the way to go. So is the kind of mental sort of calm and being in the right mental state almost the most important thing?
Yes, I think it's much less tangible, isn't it? It's hard to sort of quantify that mental well-being aspect, but our immune health is really the product of a dynamic interaction between our mind, our body, and our environment. And there's a direct connection between the immune system and the brain. They're both sensing systems, you know, and if you are in danger, your brain is going to be relaying information from what you see and hear and what you feel, and it's going to be sending that signal internally to other systems in the body so they can be prepared. So if you were frightened, your heart rate might change, you might be prepared to run, but this is also going to be priming your immune system because there might be danger, you might get injured, there might be a risk of infection, that kind of thing. So you've always got that crosstalk between your brain and your immune system, and actually your immune cells have receptors on them for the different neurochemicals, so things like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and many others, which are there to sort of almost translate what you're thinking and what you're feeling to what your immune system should be doing. So the brain and the immune system have this exquisite connection. It's all the time sort of translating our thoughts, our feelings, speaking to our immune system in sort of real time and shaping the function of the immune cells, either for better or worse. And there's been a substantial body of literature on stress and trauma, particularly adverse childhood events, and how this can actually cause a bit of a change in the nervous system activity that has a knock-on effect on the immune system. And then decades later, there's studies showing that there's a higher risk of things like autoimmune disease. So we know that there's this definite link. It's just much harder to study and to have the tools to really probe and understand that. But I really wanted to elevate the role of our emotional well-being and our social well-being in our immune health. But I also realize that it's quite a personal thing, because I think, you know, when I start to think about different tools that people can use to look after their mental well-being, I mean, there's so many different ones, and some of them might work for me, some of them might not work for me. So I really try to help people find a way to sort of personalize and furnish their own toolbox with different things that they can do. There's some wonderful studies, you know, just things like people who spend more time in nature, there's you know, changes to their immune system. People who have a pleasant hospital room heal and recover better. You know, being away from a noisy environment. But I think we really underestimate how much this has a huge role in our health. And I think stress is probably one of the big ones that many of us battle with. We might not really feel stress, but it's that constant feeling of being switched on, connected. Somebody might want something from us, we get triggered because we just scrolling online and see something that we don't like, and it sends our thoughts spiraling. And I'm someone who gets stressed quite easily, so I talk about the different ways we kind of empty our stress cup. And I always think I have quite a small stress cup, so I have to work really hard to empty it. And it's not about just prescribing everyone meditation, but it's about helping people find different real-time tools that they can use, sort of future-proofing stress tools that they can use. And then things like cold water swimming, or putting yourself in a sort of adverse situation that you somehow enjoy at the same time, to build up that resilience to the stress.
Mm. I as always, brilliant questions coming in from the audience. I just want to know some, just slightly more generally before I turn to them. Is there evidence to suggest that our immune systems today are getting weaker? And if so, I was wondering why that might be.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I guess it depends on what sort of point in time that you're looking at, because we are living longer, and the biggest sort of step function change in helping us get to that is probably, you know, public health measures like hand washing, you know, and vaccinations and things that came in a long time ago, which meant that the infectious diseases that would have killed our great grandparents are no longer things that kill us now. Kids don't die of childhood infections at the rate that they used to, but we might be living longer, but we're not necessarily living well. It's kind of tipped the other way. And now we don't tend to die of infectious diseases in countries like the UK to the degree we used to, but we're sort of dying the slow death from inflammatory diseases. I know it sounds a bit morbid, so it's kind of creeping the other way. I think our immune systems are a lot more deregulated. I wouldn't necessarily say they're weaker. They're still certainly very capable of responding. As a person with an autoimmune disease will tell you, that immune response is very fierce, but it's at the wrong target. So it's got a little bit confused. And because our immune system is a sensing system, it needs certain inputs from our diet, our lifestyle, our environment. It's obvious that the way that we're living our life, these inputs are missing, or that we're not giving them the right inputs to develop properly. A key one is microbial diversity. So not necessarily getting lots of infections when you're a kid, but getting lots of exposure to green space, to the microbes that are not infectious, that occupy every surface that we see in front of us, but the ones that are in natural diverse environments seem to be better, and we breathe them in, we're swallowing them, they're around us, and they support our own microbiome. Also, our diet is cultivating that microbiome, and this is the key educator and trainer of our immune system. And we know now from looking at studies in kids that we have this progressive loss of diversity of our microbiome over the generations, and whether we can get that back completely, I'm not entirely sure. There's suggestions that we need to keep a sort of log of all these species somewhere in a freezer, so that we can repopulate people if they don't inherit a healthy microbiome. Maybe that'll be something that happens in the future. So certainly there's a bit of a dysregulation going on.